Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the BRANDT Tampa podcast. Our podcast is new. Our podcast is bold, and truth is our guiding principle. But political correctness is out the door. We will tell it like it is. My name is BRANDT Tampa, and I'm the host of the BRANDT Tampa podcast. We have in our studio my co-host, two very talented and intelligent gentlemen, Mr. Russell Cato and Mr. Jamie Wilson III. In addition, we're pleased and honored to have as our guest, Mr. BRANDT Robinson, a teacher at Dunedin High School. Today, we're going to deviate from our normal broadcasting structure and have a straightforward give and take conversation with Mr. Robinson about his efforts to simply do his job as a teacher. Yes. Mr. Robinson came to our attention as a result of an article that appeared in the Tampa Bay Times recently. For the most part, we will allow Mr. Robinson to talk to us about that article and more. Mr. Robinson, welcome to the BRANDT Tampa podcast.
I am so grateful and so honored and so humbled to be here. Thank you all so much.
Certainly, we appreciate you being here.
Glad to have you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I've already introduced my co-host to Mr. Robinson, so we'll move past that point. And I want to begin by asking Mr. Robinson to share with us where you were born, raised, and educated.
Yes, sir. I am one of the 1/3 of Floridians who was actually born in this state back in 1969 in Fort Lauderdale. But most of my life has been here in Pinellas County. I graduated from Lakewood High School, Go Spartans, back in 1987, and went to Florida State University, got my bachelor's degree in political science, my master's degree in African-American history, and then I came back to Pinellas County and got a job at a strange place called Dunedin High School. Because back in the day when I was in high school in the 80s, Dunedin was just this strange place. Anything north of Ulmerton Road. I think a lot of your listeners of a certain age will probably be nodding right now at the thought like, oh yeah, that was way up there. So here I am.
So you started at Dunedin and that's where you are now.
I started at a middle school in Orlando. I was married to a different woman, and her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. That brought us back to Pinellas County, and I ended up getting a job at Dunedin, and I am now the longest serving teacher at Dunedin High School. I just finished my 26th year.
Longest serving teacher at Dunedin High School.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I understand that we have in the studio as well your wife, who's a recent retiree.
That's right.
And we want to say hello to you again as well. And congratulations on your retirement. I understand she was a science teacher.
And many of our students we have in common. And at the beginning of the year, when I talk about Mrs. Robinson, they come to learn that I had a wife number one. And when I ask them what they think I call Mrs. Robinson, a couple of them make the mistake of saying wife number two. And I pause, and I always pause for effect. And then I say, no, actually, I call her the best thing that's ever happened to me.
There you go.
Here we are.
All right, well, that's good. And again, congratulations on your retirement. Are there any other educators in your family?
My brother earned his PhD in criminology, and he has been a professor at Appalachian State for the last 20 years as well. And my mom was in the field of social work. She got her master's degree in gerontology, and she worked here in Pinellas County serving the aged population.
Okay, great. Okay, well, it seems like education is in the family.
It is indeed.
Wife, brother, mom, yourself. I want to ask, how about telling us about the article that recently appeared in the Tampa Bay Times that suggested 2 school board members were criticizing you? Talk to us about that article.
So if you don't mind, if I can just give like a 1-minute sort of overview of how this all began.
As much as you want.
So my African-American history class is a 1-semester elective. And for your listeners, all of our courses here in the state of Florida are on the state of Florida's website. So I'm teaching the curriculum that is in the state standards. It's a 1-semester elective. At the beginning of the 21-22 school year, I had a young man enrolled in my class, and you might remember when you were in school, you often drop and add classes. This young man dropped the class after 3 days. I didn't get to know him. 2 weeks later, I had found out that a parent filed a textbook appeal against the textbook I was using on the grounds that my textbook was positing and forwarding some things that some of your listeners might have heard of, critical race theory and the 1619 Project, which we can certainly talk about down the road. Mm-hmm. It was then that I learned that her son was the young man in my class. So it became pretty clear that she enrolled her son just so he would get the course outline and syllabus. That's the grounds of which she learned about the textbook. She filed a textbook appeal. A committee was formed. Her appeal was unanimously rejected. She then filed a formal records request. I had to submit all the materials, all the video clips, all the handouts I used for the class. Nothing came of that either, except that by the next semester, the Tampa Bay Times learned about this, and they did a big article. And so I learned that the woman in question, the parent in question, was a member of Moms for Liberty, a group that had only formed that year, right? Now, by that time, if you remember, 2022, Governor DeSantis is running for re-election. By that time, he's regularly making accusations that teachers are engaged in indoctrination, that they're engaged in grooming students, and even use the expression teaching them to hate America. And I say that because of that, many journalists around the country were starting to understand what was happening in Florida. They had seen, as we all have, they'd seen the scenes of school board meetings in which some of these angry Americans, these Moms for Liberty members, are making these accusations. And then, of course, in July of that year is when the two laws, the Parental Rights in Education, which is often referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill, and another law called the Stop Woke Act. Those two laws took effect. So by that time, everybody was looking at Florida. I mean, all of us here in the studio have probably used the expression to be on the front lines kind of figuratively, but you know, now here we are literally on the front lines. And because we were anticipating the governor possibly announcing that he's going to run for president, as he does, we understood that he was going to use the strategy that he's developed in Florida when he goes to other states. So here we are.
Okay, very interesting story. And the events, as you described them, are not surprising, to say the least, because as you stated, these scenarios are happening all over the place, all over the place. I want to ask you, the two school board members, if I'm correct, do you know if one in particular suggested that you need to be out of the classroom because you're teaching Marxist philosophies? Or was that apparent?
So it's not every day that you can type in your name and the word Marxism and an article will come up. But the reason is because many of the members of Moms for Liberty, not just here in Pinellas County, but across the country, and I say this with tremendous respect, but I have found that the vast majority of those fellow citizens are grossly undereducated. So I don't think they would know the difference between Marxism or socialism or correct. So I don't know which one might have used that term, but because they have a closed Facebook group, right? You and I could not join that. They often you're sort of turning me into like the poster child of all things indoctrination, all things critical race theory. So the article that most recently appeared 2 weeks ago was because two of the members of the school board, before they were elected, were often engaged in using my name and making accusations against me and making false claims about the things I was doing in my classroom.
This is the reason that I felt so compelled to reach out to you to ask that you come on this show, because you've been fighting back. You're not just taking what they're saying, you're fighting back. And I can't say enough about how much I appreciate that, to the point that next time you need to fight back, I want to be next to you in that fight.
Well, here we are.
But it's a situation whereby you were so right. These Moms for Liberty individuals, they're ignorant. They're using talking points that have been handed to them, not knowing what the hell they're talking about. Not knowing what the hell they're talking about. One of those individuals, I don't know if it was Dawn Peters or Stephanie Meyer, defeated for that school board seat, Dr. Benson. Dr. Benson was so qualified that it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous how much more qualified she was than her opponent. And it was shocking to find out that she did not win that race. And then we get, again, I don't remember if it was Meyer or Peters that defeated her, but either or is horrible for our students in Pinellas County, Now, with all that's been going on, do you feel that you've received support from the school-based administration at Dunedin?
I have, and I think this is really critical that your listeners understand. The two laws in question were deliberately vaguely written. And that's important because, where Governor DeSantis here with us, he could not engage in a discussion about the history because I don't think he wants to sit down with people that know the history. Right. That's not his intention. His intention, as you said, was to take advantage of a base of supporters who are mostly grossly undereducated and ignorant about our country's history. And as a result, those talking points, whether it be critical race theory, whether it be then conflating critical race theory with now what's called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then now we're at a point where it's all just been bundled under something called wokeness, right? So you don't have to know what you're talking about. You don't even have to know what woke is. Yeah. You point the finger at any number of quote others out there. And it's quite terrifying and chilling to think, I'm one of those people when I'm simply just trying to teach the history of the country. That's all I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Either of you want to say something?
It's just sad what I'm hearing. It's governor.
Well, I asked the question earlier, Jay, if you don't mind. Had you finished, Jay?
I'm good.
Okay. I asked the question, do you think they even know what Marxism is about? And you definitely clarified that by saying no in your own way. I asked if you're being supported by the school-based administration.
Yes.
What about district level administrators? Have they said anything to you that you might feel was not supportive of your right to protest?
Yeah. So to continue that thought about the laws being vaguely written, what we're seeing is because of those laws being vaguely written, the response from districts is vastly different. We happen to be here in Pinellas County. Jim Crow was here in Pinellas County,
right?
But Jim Crow also understood that this county, because we're a peninsula on a peninsula and we have beautiful waterfront, property values are higher. We generally, I say this with respect, we generally have a more well-educated population, and our school board has reflected that. In other words, our school board has been very supportive. They've been very proactive because I happen to know the superintendent. Now, we only have a superintendent that's been in office for a year, Kevin Hendrick. I happen to have the privilege of teaching with Kevin for 5 years at Dunedin High School. He really is a person of integrity. But I say that because he understands it's in his best interest to work with the teachers union because he understands the bigger picture of what's happening, the threat that this poses to public education in general. Now, if you're in Clay County or you're in some other county in the state, they interpret those laws very differently. So, for example, in Duval County, what did they do with regards to textbook complaints? Their response was, let's just go ahead and take all the books off the shelf first. Whereas here in Pinellas, the approach was, we'll just do it on a case-by-case basis. So in general, I've been very supported by my school and my principal and by the district.
That is great. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah. I went to an NAACP meeting and I went late because I had my times wrong and the meeting was dispersing, but I went up on the stage and extended my hand to Kevin Hendricks to introduce myself. And he said, Ray Tampa, I know you. You were the one who interviewed me when I was first trying to become an administrator. Obviously, I'm not going to remember everybody I interviewed, but he obviously remembered that I interviewed him when he was first trying to become an administrator. And I remember now that he is a man that you can talk with, and he's a willing listener.
But I want to, and I apologize for interrupting, Ray, but this is really critical. If Moms for Liberty next November, because remember, 4 months ago, Governor DeSantis did something that I've never heard any governor do in the United States. He gave a press conference. He had been meeting with Moms for Liberty all day. He gave a press conference where he identified by name sitting current school board members in several counties around the state that he wanted to be removed from their seat. In other words, he announced that he wanted to replace them. And this is critically important because with the 2 members elected in November, if next year 2 more are elected, they will have a majority on the board. And what the Moms for Liberty MO has been in 7 other counties already in the state is they will immediately fire the superintendent. And Kevin is aware of the situation. So between now and next year, everybody listening, this is critically important that we educate our fellow citizens. We have to make sure that they're engaged and they understand what's really at stake, because if Moms for Liberty should get a majority here in Pinellas County, Governor DeSantis will say, it's one thing to gain a majority in Clay County, but to gain a majority in Pinellas County, Florida, and to turn Pinellas County, Florida red, and then watch what Moms for Liberty does when they can actually appoint the superintendent, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that point out, because I wasn't thinking that far, but that's a heck of a point that all of our listeners need to be aware of. Russ, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I think what you have to understand with DeSantis, this is a political agenda with him. This is a strong political agenda with him. If you ever listen about his platform to become president, his main thing is wokeness dies here. You got to understand that. And so when you're talking about DEI, that is the first thing that he wants to kill. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are the things that he wants to kill. So when you start teaching American history, if you include anything like that in your approach to American history, that's what he wants. He's not concerned about the accuracy of what he's saying. He is concerned about people feeling how he feels, you see? So the concern of accuracy and the truth is not with DeSantis, it's with the people he selects. This man wants to be an autocratic leader.
Right.
That's what he is trying to do with Florida. And so if he's able to do that with his little lapdog people, Moms and Liberty, and by the way, I always understand history. Why is it that when groups are made, they want to use patriotic names?
Yeah.
Look at it. Look at it. Go back and look at the Sons of Liberty. It was the same thing that is DeSantis is put. Let's put patriotic names to this thing. The Moms of Liberty. Come on, people.
Russ, that's part of the Republican success story in the sense of messaging.
Yes,
the Republicans have developed a messaging system that outshines the Democrats day in and day out. It's unfortunate. I hate to say it, but we have to get our messaging improved, significantly more improved. Sons of Liberty, Daughters of Liberty, Stepsons of Liberty, whatever they want to say. Whatever they want to say.
I have a question. Are there any other teachers in this fight with you?
And I'm so proud of my colleagues across the state. There are many, many teachers, even across the hall. Jack Benson, John King down the hall. There's something that's quite ironic here. For most of our history, our school system was racially segregated. And that's true across much of the country. And what that meant was, for most of our history, you weren't learning about what today we would call Black history or Asian history, anything. So in other words, here's something I hope your listeners appreciate. It has been a real struggle here in Florida just to get the curriculum standards we have in place now. U.S. history teachers now are required to teach about the Rosewood Massacre. They're required to teach about the Chinese Exclusion Act. They're required to teach about who Cesar Chavez is. They're required to teach about the Stonewall riot in 1969. So those teaching points are still there. The governor doesn't want to take issue with any specific history because he would lose. The purpose of the laws that are on the books is to intimidate teachers. It's to intimidate. And because now a majority of teachers are on annual contract, because in 2011, Senate Bill 736 was passed that mandated all teachers. If you're on an annual contract and you're a new teacher, and at the end of the year, your job is up to be seen if you're going to come back the next year, your job's pretty tenuous. So the last thing you're going to do is risk that you're going to have some parent make accusations that you're trying to indoctrinate or that you made their child feel uncomfortable or feel guilty or anguish, which are the 3 words that are in the law. So we have a situation where, as you were saying, the governor knows exactly what he's doing. He's strategizing with a grossly undereducated base, but he's also wrapping it in patriotism. I mean, we will never forget. We'll never forget what Make America Great is all about, because if you say you want to make America great, then that means there's something wrong with it. And he's conditioned a base of, there's millions of Americans that believe the problem with America It's rooted in any number of others, including the good people in this room.
Yeah, stacking the deck the same way they're doing is did the Supreme Court so that they can get the superintendents out once they get,
Indeed.
But
Russ,
I'm 85 years of age, and I don't know, you guys are much younger than I. But you got to understand American history. This thing is European centric. That's where it's coming from. That we've been, when you go back and look at it, and my teaching rate, you probably taught it too. All our life, we've been teaching a European standpoint of view in American history, which is so damn wrong.
mm-hmm.
That's what he is saying. I want to ask you something because I took something from you. You say history must be taught in its entirety.
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by that?
So let me give you an example. If you go to a school board meeting, and I want to urge all of your listeners, please make a commitment to go to school board meetings, because that's a strategy that Moms for Liberty has used. And again, depending on where you live in the country, the composition of your school board, the demographics of the county where you live in the country, if you're a school board member sitting in a dais and you're looking out and there's a bunch of angry people, you might fear that. You might worry that that's going to translate into you not getting reelected. So you might just cave to those pressures. So I say, to answer your question, I say this because critical race theory was like the boogeyman that was used for the first 2 years in this fight to label any teaching of history, and they just call it critical race theory. Critical race theory was born in the early 1970s with a small group of legal scholars who had one simple question: what is the impact of systemic racism on the legal field? Critical race theory is not history. It's just a framework to examine the impact of systemic racism. So what happened was, and you were talking how critical it is for us to actually have effective messaging. You don't go to a school board meeting and say critical race theory is not being taught in any K through 12 public school in the country, which it's not. The best solution, the best strategy to counter that is to simply insist that all of our history be taught in its entirety. That puts the pressure back on those people to talk about the actual history, because what they don't want to do is talk about what is it about the history that makes your child feel uncomfortable. Ironically, nothing, because I teach social studies, I teach history, I teach sociology. My young people can handle talking about very uncomfortable things. They have something in their hand called a smartphone. It's all the world's collective knowledge and wisdom. And we have 2 grandchildren, and we just went on a 7-day trip with just the 2 of them. They know stuff that might shock some adults. And so if you're sitting in a classroom, your students can handle talking about racial slavery. They can handle talking about lynchings. They can handle talking about discrimination. They can handle those things. I think the bigger question is, why do so many parents use their children to not want that to happen?
Yeah, and that's exactly what they're doing.
You hammered my next question. My next question was, and I'm going to ask it anyway, even though you already answered it. My next question was, since you're in a high school, does it appear that your students are well aware of what's going on with these discussions in our educational arena? And you've answered the question.
Well, ironically, I mean, I with no disrespect to my students, but more than half of my students don't know what the heck's going on out there in general. Honestly, they don't pay attention to what's, but there are certainly students that understand exactly what's going on. My point is that, when I'm teaching sociology, I'm required to teach about things like gender. I'm required to teach about racism. I mean, those are part of the standard. So how do I do that other than just to teach it? And often my class is based on a lot of discussion. So, if you ask my sociology students from this year, I have a very long window in my classroom. I mean, probably 9 or 10 times I would gesture to the window and say, gosh, I wish that the adults out there were in here right now, because what my students are handling in these discussions is just, it's emotional, it's brilliant, it's beautiful, it's insightful. And it's, it's exactly what we do as teachers.
Well, as I stated earlier, I'm so happy that you're here, because you've enlightened us, and hopefully you've enlightened our audience with a lot of very pertinent information about the climate here in Pinellas County schools. And the fact that we have a couple of idiots on the school board. I'll call them idiots. I don't expect you to do it.
No.
A couple of idiots on the school board that have been critical of you in particular, as well as other teachers who are not advancing their ideology, So I again and again commend you on your courage. I commend you on your fight, because I understand you went to the school board and you tried to educate the school board members on what critical race theory is all about. That takes courage.
And I have regularly invited, before the board, I've invited them to come to my classroom. I've actually invited the governor. I make a daily TikTok video every day, and I've on a number of occasions invited the governor. Remember, the Governor DeSantis, gragraduated from Dunedin.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
His sister,
His
his sister was in my AP American History class earlier in my career.
Yeah.
No indoctrination either. Just saying.
Oh,
You know, when he came, you know, it's all about messaging again. When he came out with that education, not indoctrination talking point, I came out with education, not discrimination.
Amen.
Education, not intimidation. You know, we have to have some counteract to their stupidity. And as Democrats or as others, there doesn't seem to be anybody with that focus on counteracting their stupidity.
Did you see what Liz Cheney said the other day? It was brilliant.
What did she say?
What you just said. We are in an environment that are electing idiots.
Yes, she did say that.
But I
We're
think
electing idiots.
But I think you're onto something that's at the very, very foundation of this. Public schools are the foundation of our democracy.
Right.
And so if what we're seeing across the board, across the country, is a wide swath of American adults who are grossly undereducated, that should be proof enough that we should then turn our focus onto the educational system, because we're producing citizens that don't know how our government works, that don't know our history. And that makes those people more vulnerable and more susceptible to the kind of messaging, because many of those fellow citizens who are grossly undereducated, they're victimized by a lack of healthcare. They're victimized by a lack of childcare. They're victimized by a lack of affordable housing. And instead of having politicians actually talking about those kind of issues, as you said, sir, they've made a living talking about wokeness, running around the country. And now DeSantis is actually running for president. And people would say, oh, no, he's gonna tone it down. He's going to moderate it when he announces his candidacy. No, he's doubling and tripling down.
Right.
Because he's appealing to something that's an uncomfortable truth in this country. And that is something that's called whiteness. And we don't have the courage or the integrity to really call out white supremacy when we see it. You know, when we do, with all due respect and not to use profanity, but when we call out white supremacy, we can't half-ass it. It's, you can't, you know, there are certain things you don't compromise. There's not slavery light. There's not discrimination light. If you're going to deal with white supremacy, you have to meet it head on.
Right.
Brent Robinson for governor.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
That's my attitude. Brent Robinson for governor.
But you're right. It's misdirection to keep from dealing with the real issues.
Correct. And deflection.
Right.
Yes.
Let me ask you something since you said that. When I look at Trump and I look at DeSantis, there's a base, if you know. Nobody want to mess with Trump base. You ever notice that?
Correct.
But let me go back to what you said. Look at his base. These are the people that you just got to talking about. These are the people who have no knowledge of actually, you know, what is going on in teaching and things like that. So my concern, what keep this base together?
I think when you have been socialized to believe that the problems that are legitimate problems, that you can sort of suggest to those people that here's the answer to those problems. It's always something oversimplified. It's always something that doesn't involve a lot of discourse or dialogue or analysis. It's an oversimplified quote solution to what you think is your problem. But the deflection is they're not actually talking about the real issues of the problems. Right. So when you point a finger and you want to talk about the crisis at the border, you talk about this, that, and the other, what's really at the foundation of a lot of that is white supremacy and the preservation of, I think, your sense that somehow your country's being taken from you. We get back to make America great again. Well, if you think your country's being taken from you, then you might even feel like you're on a mission. And that's what's so chilling about a lot of the base of supporters for DeSantis and Trump is that a lot of these Americans feel like they are on a mission to save America.
Because they create fear about
Fear.
losing America.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say to all of you, we're at that point that I hate, and that's the point that we have to wrap it up. And I want to say to my two co-hosts, as always, thanks for discussion that was great. And to our guests, my God, we're so happy that you were here.
Yes.
And we're
I'm so
hoping,
grateful. Thank you.
and we're hoping that we can get this podcast out to as many people in the world as will see it, because you've offered some great information to our listeners on the Ray Tampa Podcast, 99.1 FM The Bird. We thank you for tuning in each and every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. And we ask that you keep in mind sponsorships are welcome. So with that being said, good evening.